All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on Azure Cost Management. I hope everyone's doing well wherever you are in the country, all things considered, everything we've got going on. So I think we're just going to jump right into it this morning. So we'll go ahead and get started. One of the biggest questions that we get related to Azure is, how do I manage my costs? And this question comes up whether you're just starting an investigation and planning stage, or it comes up where we've already gotten into Azure and you need better tools to assess your environment and as everything continues to grow. So I think a good way that we're going to start today is go ahead and put together, we've actually put a poll question. It'll give us as presenters a good idea of where everybody is. And so I'll go ahead and launch this, hopefully. And so if you can answer this real quickly, it's just what scenario best suits you. Either that you're migrating to Azure right now and trying to understand the cost, or you're already in Azure and want to better manage those costs. So, or both, which happens as well. So if we can give a couple of seconds for people to click on something there. And it looks like it's a lot of both. We've got about work on each one of those, so that's great. Well, it's true. That's why we opened it up the way we did. Is that if you're looking at Azure now and you haven't, this is part of the next plan, the next wave. One of the biggest questions, well, how much does it cost, or how do I even figure out and keep control of my costs? So that's perfect for what we're talking about. And if you're already in Azure, it's another one of those. You've gotten into it, but where are all the tools? How do we actually, where do we actually go from here? So we'll go ahead and close the poll. Yeah, 33%, 20 to 44. Okay, excellent. All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Rogers, and I'm the CEO of Big Green IT. This is the third in a series of 4 webinars that we're doing on Azure. Today we're going to talk about cost management. If you missed our Azure 101 or data center migration webinar, which were the last 2, they're available for replay on our website. So today, as with most of our webinars, we're definitely encouraging questions. This is a live interactive, although we'll be presenting some things. Please ask questions along the way. That's what this is all about. There, I believe on the right-hand side, there's a spot for you to type something in. We'll be monitoring those as we go through this. And I'll try to weave those in as we go through the presentation. Get your questions in early so that way we can anticipate and get those answered by our experts. Let's see. So some of the topics that we're going to talk about today, they'll be on the next slide. Mike.
I don't take hints well.
Yeah, that's fine. So it's not really an agenda. This is more of, hey, here's what we're going to talk about, and I'll introduce the speakers in a second. It's how to understand and forecast a bill, analyzing your costs by locations, creating budgets, setting up cost alerts, which is a big one. Everyone's afraid of, runaway VMs and things like that, and then leveraging some automated recommendations to help optimize your Azure environment. We'll do some questions and answers along the way, but also at the end, and then we'll wrap up from there.
Yeah.
So very quickly, who is Big Green IT, just so you've got an idea of who's presenting or what we're talking about today. Next is basically Big Green IT. We're headquartered we're in California throughout. Our headquarters is actually in Sacramento with offices in San Diego and Los Angeles. The big thing is we're a gold platform partner. This is what we do every day. We're direct with Microsoft, and a big thing is we're part of their data center optimization program. So this is the Azure is square in the middle of everything that Microsoft is doing and what we're doing with Microsoft as a partner.
All right.
And the next one. So yeah, so and basically want to make sure I introduce people. Aside from myself on here, we've got Mike Procker, who is our VP of Cloud Services, as well as Wade Walker, who is our Director of Cloud Services. So if you guys are ready, we're going to go ahead and kick this off. And Mike, I'm going to let you take this from here.
Good deal. All right. So As you've all heard, today we're going to be talking about Azure Cost Management. And Azure Cost Management is built in to every Azure subscription. It's not something you pay extra for. It's not an extra feature. It's basically the tool that Azure gives you in order to look at what you're spending where, how much it's costing, do some forecasting, and keep all your costs under control as you move more and more of your workflows and resources up into the cloud. Azure Cost Management, we'll call it ACM also a lot throughout the presentation. This is a vital part of the Azure service. And as you can see on this slide here, it's there for lots of reasons. It's not just for the bean counters to play around with. You've got it for your management team, so they can keep an eye on your overall IT expenditures across all of your Azure resources. Of course, for the finance teams, because they're going to need to allocate expenses to the right departments in your company. Maybe you have to bill some things back out to individual clients and recuperate charges that way. And then application teams, if you're building your own apps, whether you've been doing it for a long time with legacy applications or you're just starting to get into application development now, your app teams can use Azure Cost Management to see how applications perform and what they cost when they're written different ways. You can take an old virtual machine and just stick it up into Azure and run it with the app on it the way we've always done it, and that'll have a certain amount of cost associated with it. But you can also write your applications to run natively in Azure with Azure Functions and microservices and things like that. And using Azure Cost Management, you can get a good handle on how running your applications these different ways affects your cost. So in order to have successful continuous cost management, you need to have visibility, which is analyzing your cost analysis, exporting that information out into other tools. You need to have accountability, so you need to have budgets and alerts and things that make sure you stay on top of what's happening and keep people responsible for the charges that they incur. And then you also want to have optimization. Azure can do a lot of things a lot of different ways, and there's definitely more efficient ways to do things sometimes than might be the first thing that somebody turns on. So with the hybrid use benefit, which is a licensing benefit from Microsoft that you can take advantage of in Azure, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Reserved instances, which is a way you can commit to using resources for a year or for 3 years up front, and that commitment gets you significantly lower costs if you do it that way. And then another form of optimization available is right sizing. So the Azure Cost Management tool can actually come back and tell you whether or not certain resources could be run on a smaller VM, for example, or a less expensive resource. Azure Cost Management gives you all three of these. So I'm going to do the next probably dozen or so slides. We're just going to blow through real fast. It's essentially showing you what the tool looks like once you're logged in. And we decided to do it this way because it's a lot quicker than just clicking around inside the site. So these are all screenshots out of Azure Cost Management as if you were in your own environment, but with some demo data. One of the most common things you're going to want to do in ACM is view your forecasted cost, get an idea of where it looks like you're going to be for the end of the month. And when you open up Azure Cost Management, this is the default view that you get is right here at this particular screen. And as you use services and add things to the environment, Azure is going to learn from that past usage and continually make more accurate forecast predictions. In this graph here, the solid color to the left of what looks like about April 15th. Oh, look, tax day. Well, what used to be tax day. The solid color to the left there is your actual cost or your amortized cost, depending on how you have it set. And then the shaded color to the right is the represented forecast. In this particular example, you see a dotted line across there, which shows that there's a budget set. And we're going to talk about budgets again shortly here. View forecasted costs grouped by service. So in that previous slide, it was just a big green hill climbing. You can see here that the forecasted cost, you've got this little rainbow selection here, and down below there's a legend of what each of those colors means. So what we've done here is, if you see where I've circled group by service name, just by changing that one drop down, it'll break out your different service types, and give you a different bar chart for each of those. And so you can see how they contribute towards your overall spend. Of course, when you do it this way, you're not going to get your forecast by any particular type of service. You're just going to get it all together. So if you want to view your forecasts service by service, we can make another quick change live in the portal here, flip things around a little bit, and you'll add like a filter for virtual machines. And in this example, we've even added a specific type, these D1 virtual machines, just by clicking on those two things and changing our granularity here to daily. Now we can see for the entire month of April again, day by day, what our charges have been and what we're forecasting them to be, and it's laid out on a day-by-day basis that way. Another thing you can do in Azure in the cost management tool is we got those charts that we looked at, and those are a great way to visualize how costs are distributed, but sometimes you just need a table of charges to see what things are actually costing dollars and cents. So in this example, I've grouped the different Azure service types together so you can see what they are by each service tier. So in the middle there, you see the names of the services. So log analytics, virtual machines, storage, things like that are grouped together, and it's showing here over on the right in that column what the cost would be, or is actually. One of the another things you like to do with cost analysis is look for anomalies. You know, things are fine when it's $1,000 a month in and month out, then it all makes perfect sense. But one day usage drops or usage spikes, you might need to dive in and figure out what's causing that. So if you isolate specific resources, like in this case, we decided to isolate virtual machines, and then you set your granularity back at daily, change it to a line graph, and you can see here that some of the virtual machines are cruising along at a nice steady rate, but a couple of them dropped off about a week into the month for some reason, and then one group of them is starting to spike again. In this example, what you're seeing, the box in the middle, is actually a flyout menu. This works in just about all the charts and graphs. If you hover your mouse throughout anywhere of the graph, you'll get a day snapshot of where you are. So in this example, on March 26th, that's where we're hovered over, and you can see all the different VMs and how much the cost was for that particular day. And as you slide it back and forth, it'll give you the actual daily cost. Your services in Azure are they're all built on Azure Resources. So a virtual machine is a resource, a hard drive or virtual hard drive is a resource. Basically anything, a network card, a VPN gateway, these are all different resources. And a lot of times you will want to break it down and look at what the cost of any given individual resource costs. One of the things that we run into a lot is people, when they spin up their Azure environment, they really want to get a VPN back to their office because they feel like they have to have that in place. And a VPN gateway can be expensive. It can be like $140 just for a VPN gateway. And if your total cost is maybe $1,000 or $1,500, $140 of that could be a lot. Well, when you use the view by resource option here, this table shows you exactly what individual resource is costing you, and anything that might be costing a lot or costing a little is just going to jump right out here. Like in this example, that firewall down about 2/3 down the bottom, that's $160 a month for that particular firewall. Maybe you've got a different firewall virtual appliance from another vendor you could use instead that might cost more, might cost less. But here with this view, you can see exactly what each Azure resource is costing you. So all the different filter categories in Azure Cost Management, they're all called dimensions. And so by grouping and filtering by one or more dimensions, you can get an accurate picture of what your Azure costs are and just tailored to whatever the specific needs are that you have at that time. And best of all, when you create the view that you're looking for, set 2 or 3 different filters, change the time period the way you want it, and get it all set, you can then go ahead and save that view. So the next month that you want to come and look at it, you don't have to rebuild everything from scratch again and click all these different things to get it set up. You can save that view, call it whatever you want, and jump right back into it again. You can even share that view out with other people in the company so that they don't have to redo the work that you've done getting the views just the way that you want them. All of the charts and pie graphs that are part of Azure Cost Management are also, they're live. So everything I've talked about so far, you'd be using these pill-shaped controls to click a drop down and select a time range or select a grouping or select a resource or something like that. But if you're just doing some quick and dirty changes to the graphs you're looking at on the screen, you can actually click, and you can see the two areas I've circled here, one on the line or the area chart and one down on the pie chart. If you click any of those colors in those charts or graphs, it will immediately filter to the item that you selected on and drill right down into it. So on that location graph down below, you can see where it looks like US East and South Central, that's most of the charges. But then all these other regions, what are these all down in here? If you click down in those, it'll actually change those graphs on the fly and refocus to drill down deeper into that specific data. I mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the call, reserved instances, and a reserved instance is a great way to save money by committing to purchasing your resources in advance. You do want to, from time to time, make sure that the reserved instances that you've committed are things you're actually using in your Azure environment. So one way you can do that is by quickly setting the Azure Cost Management tool so that you're grouping by charge type. The charge type is reserved instance or unreserved, and then changing on the left the cost from the actual accumulated cost to your amortized cost over the year, and that will give you a graph that looks like this. So in this particular example, looks like this this demo customer has got a lot of unused reservation down there in the light blue and only a little bit of usage in the dark blue. So either we need to change their reserved instances, which we can do in Azure. You're never stuck in a corner. We can always change stuff around. So either we have to change that or find out why they're not using the right types of resources that they've committed to be using. Doing something like this can keep you from accidentally finding out you spent a bunch of money on something that you're not actually using in your environment.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
I have a question here that slide may have, it may be related to it or not, but let me throw this out because this is something that is asked a lot as well. And this is from a gentleman named Todd. It says, if you use reserve 3-year pricing and decide the VM is not the right size, can you change the size, or are you stuck with the size for 3 years? And related to that, he also says, say you decide you no longer need the VM, can you delete it and reduce your costs, or are you stuck with paying for 3 years? So a little bit more on what you were starting to say there about what you can and can't do once you commit.
Absolutely. So the way reserved instances work is you, it basically goes on dollar value. So if you have bought or committed to, because, and I keep saying committed to because with Azure reserved instances, unlike in Amazon, you don't have to actually, if you make a 1 or 3 year reservation, you don't have to write that check up front. You're just making the commitment. We can still bill you monthly. So if you made a reservation, if the cost for virtual machine was going to be $3,000 per year, and let's say that the reserved instance cost was $1,200 for the year, we could bill you at $100 a month, as long as it still comes out to that $1,200 a year. So it's a commitment, not an upfront payment. All that being said, the way they do it is it's the calculated value of the reserved instance. If you pay $1,200 towards some VM service or some other service that turns out is the wrong one, you can trade that back in, and as long as you're buying different reserved instances that are equal to or greater, there's absolutely no penalty for doing that at any time. So if it's a different VM type, then as long as you're either buying a longer period of time or a more expensive VM, then there's no penalty whatsoever. Now, if you're going down in size, then, or if you're trading it entirely or turning it off entirely, changing your mind completely, technically, there is a 12% penalty on the remaining value that you are either trading in or turning off entirely. However, as of yet, that has been in free, ever since this reserved instances were created like 3 years ago, that has been has not been enforced, and it says it specifically on the Microsoft website. They are not yet actually charging anyone any of those 12% penalties for turning off or turning back in reserved instances. Also, if you accidentally reserve an instance and don't use it, then when you turn it back in, if it has never been used, there's no penalty that way either. So I've had customers accidentally buy 2 reserved instances because they did it on their own, or they used the portal and maybe the portal was a little slow or something, and they bought it twice and didn't notice it, because it's not real obvious unless you go and look at your reserved instance cost, or like with cost management here, you may not notice it. So if it's never used, there's no penalty. And even in cases now where there's supposed to be a penalty, Microsoft isn't actually charging them yet. Any other questions out there? Should I move on, you think? Okay. All right. So even with over 20 different dimensions that you can group by or sort by, the final result is always just a simple hierarchy of usage detail. So what if you need to allocate a resource, a group of resources, or even an entire subscription across multiple cost centers or multiple business units? In order to do that, you're going to want to unleash the power of tags. Each resource in Azure can have up to 50 tags assigned. And with proper tag governance and enforcement, even the biggest, largest, most complicated Azure environments can be kept completely under control. And there's not a good way to show really what you can do with tags in the portal specifically. That really comes into play more with exports, which I'm going to come across in a minute. But tags are really what you want to do if you have a large environment that you're building. It's the best way to keep track of what resources are going where, especially if you have multiple cost centers sharing a specific resource, like a VPN gateway or some piece of core networking that isn't just going to one service. Anywhere in here, you can go ahead and download your usage details. Once you create a filtered set of data like that, there's a quick and easy download. You can pull that in a PDF format or a CSV format, pretty much just on the fly there if you need to grab something to give to accounting or something like that. A very, very important part of Azure Cost Management is also budgets. So a budget is just what it sounds like. You basically pick a resource or a resource group or your entire subscription, and you can set up email alerts at up to 5 different thresholds per budget. So you don't necessarily have to just wait until you get the budget that you've already spent, the alert that you've spent too much. You can get warnings along the way, either monthly or annually or weekly, depending on what this reset period is. And along the way, if you get hit like an 80% threshold or whatever you want to set it to, you can get alerts that's coming, and that finds out if you've got a project that's where the usage is starting to run real high, or if something else is out of control, then you can set that up in advance and be notified.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to mention too, as we're kind of going through all these slides, that everyone will get an email in the next 24, 48 hours thanking for their attendance, but also a copy and a link to all of these slides. So no need, I mean, you can scribble down some notes if it helps you think of questions you want to ask towards the end. But I should have said this up front. If there's things here that that really are pertinent to you that you want, you're going to get a copy of these slides, or at least a link to the deck within the next 24, 48 hours.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Once your budgets are set up, then you'll have budget visibility anywhere in ACM that you happen to be. So the budget column, by default, it's just blank. You have the total here, 2746, and this particular resource has a budget of 4,500. That becomes filled in once you set up your budgets, and then this dotted line across the top also starts appearing on all of the charts and graphs once you have budgets set up. So while the most common use of budgets is those simple email notifications that we've already talked about, budget alerts can also be used to trigger more sophisticated automations. ACM supports using action groups, which is in the drop down in the middle here. That's what they call those action groups. And those can activate Azure runbooks, logic apps, webhooks, or Azure Functions and take sophisticated actions when an alert happens. You can have an action group actually move a VM resource to a smaller size. Maybe you've got, maybe you have something that you need to run all the time and you've got it on a big machine most of the time, but when you go over a certain budget, rather than shut it down, you want to maybe move it to a less expensive resource. An action group can do that based on a budget alert. Or if it's a hard, brick wall sort of budget, you can have your runbooks actually shut resources down when they hit a spending limit. Automated data exports. This is a great way to get data out that is going to be used for other things. So I showed you earlier how you can export data just from a table and grab a quick CSV file of what you're looking at on the screen. But if you know that you're going to want your monthly cost by resource or your monthly cost by resource group or something like that, if you know that you're going to want that or some other department in your company is going to want that every month, you can set up these automatic exports, and it'll just, every time that time period goes by, it will go ahead and crank out that report. On the right-hand half, you can see some of the settings here: daily, weekly, custom, how you want to set that up, and it will dump that into an Azure storage account. So Azure Blob Storage, real inexpensive storage, and then you'll have a browsable directory of those storage exports that you can either download and bring into other tools, or you could have another billing system or ERP or something like that just grab those files directly from the storage account and process them to do other work within the organization. So you can set that up, and that way no one has to have part of their daily morning coffee tasks to log on and click 4 different things every single day. You can just set that all up to happen automatically. And then the third piece that we talked about in the very beginning for continuous cost management was optimization. And the Azure Cost Management tool has a few good optimization tools built in. It's not a full recommendation engine. It doesn't go out there and replace what a team of people could do, or maybe some more sophisticated tools might be able to do, but it does give you some recommendations to catch some of the low-hanging fruit that could be out there. And some of those common areas are virtual machines that could take advantage of the hybrid use benefit, which is a way we've talked about in some of our other presentations, but it's a way you can use your Windows Server or SQL Server licensing that you've already paid for with software assurance on-prem, and actually either duplicate that licensing in the cloud for free or move that license up to the cloud. Depends on what kind of licensing you have, but hybrid use benefit is the way you could take advantage of that. If Azure spots virtual machines that you're currently renting the Windows or SQL licensing for, then it'll make that recommendation to see if that's something you can do. It will also identify VMs that are on pay-as-you-go now that could be converted into reserved instances and show you what your potential savings could be. And then finally, it will look for virtual machines that are running significantly below capacity or possibly not running at all. Machines that have been idle for weeks or months on end, those will sit there, and if they're idle if they're low usage, then you're paying for the entire compute of that virtual machine, even though it's sitting at 1 or 2 or 4% CPU usage. So Azure will recommend that maybe you drop that down to a smaller VM that doesn't cost as much. If the machine is turned off entirely, and then while you're not paying for the compute, you're probably still paying for a connected disk attached to that at $10 or $13 a month, and or even $40 or $50, and that may not be a lot, but if you have 100 of them, then it can add up real fast. So the cost recommendation tool will identify those and suggest that you make some changes there as well. So it's always good to come back and look at the tool here. And that's it for this piece of the walkthrough. Are there any other questions out there before I move on to the next piece?
Yeah, there's one question, Mike, from Heather Hopkins. She's asking, she's curious if she's going to exceed her budget. How would we show anticipated yearly costs so she can request more funds to cover any anticipated shortage?
Well, the forecasting report is going to show, I mean, it'll show where it's headed. It's going to it's pretty straightforward as far as how it calculates that. So if you were increasing, or let's say you had a VM that was running about, I don't know, $50 a day or something, then you could tell that, 10 days in you're at 500, 20 days in you're at 1,000. If you've already made changes to that environment, it'll probably take a couple of days to reflect the new growth rate or decreasing rate. Am I missing part of the
No,
question?
I think that's it. I think the other thing is Azure will just keep obviously charging you. So that's why Mike mentioned setting alerts so that you get notified if you're going to be over a budget threshold you've set.
Yeah, if you need to acquire or request budget in advance, then there's a couple ways to do it. Either you set your budget threshold at around 80%, so you get an email, which means you've got 20% of your $1,000 that you can still spend while you're trying to secure funding. If you're in government, maybe you set it at 20%, so you have 80% of the time to go secure more funding. But you can set it far in advance to give you time to do that. Or if that's not applicable, or if it's not mission critical, you can set the budget alert to actually shut that resource down when it hits the wall. Maybe we do that a lot in test dev environments where you give your developers kind of the keys to go play around and do stuff, and then maybe they've got a $150 limit. You just set a brick wall shutdown at $150, and you don't care if they've spent most of it or all of it. You just don't want them to spend $151. So when the budget alert hits its limit, it'll send an email too if you want it to, but instead of just doing that, you can actually have it shut that resource down. So there's nothing, and then it'll reset at the beginning of the next period if it's set at monthly or weekly or whatever.
That sounds great. Heather, I'll message you on the side, and if you have any other questions, we can talk to you at the end.
Hey, Mike, I would imagine within the tool that you just went through, all of those graphs and forecasts and so forth are exportable or printable, because I could see Heather or anyone wanting to go to management as they get further into Azure and say, we've got this much, here's our trend. If we want to keep doing what we're doing and we've got to meet this trend, then we might need to increase that budget. So any of the tools I would imagine we showed can either print that out, or anybody can take that to management for justification.
Absolutely. The download data link that I showed at the beginning, if you click into that, there's a couple of options. There's a CSV option, there's an XLS, but there's also a PNG option. So you could always take a screenshot, but if you use the download, it'll actually give you a formatted PNG download right there.
Perfect. Yeah, it's interesting listening to you go through all those things. There's a variety of customers out there in the world, some that just have a few VMs in Azure. And then as we know, we've got customers that are running full production. Mm-hmm. And full production is one thing we can get, especially over trends over time. You can get a pretty good idea of where that is and where it's going. The rogue ones are some others that we have that are doing POCs, testing, development, and they maybe said, hey, we've got a $3,000 limit, and all of a sudden there's a $10,000 bill that comes through because they pushed all the buttons and just ran wild with it. And being able to contain that, and sometimes it doesn't need to even be contained. It just management wants to know where it's being spent. Instead of getting one Azure bill for $20,000 for the month, which departments, which unit, which VMs are doing all that stuff. So this sounds like a perfect way to do that. I think what we'll do is instead of any more questions right now, we'll kind of save them towards the end. I'd like you to introduce our next speaker and why that's part of today's presentation.
Absolutely. So while Azure Cost Management is, it's a comprehensive and robust solution. It takes care of most of our client needs, but some may need a more advanced solution. You may need more sophisticated policy enforcement. You may want additional recommendation options before the few that I mentioned. And for something like that, we've partnered with Flexera. And Flexera is formerly RightScale. Flexera purchased RightScale in 2018. They're the industry leader in cloud management platforms. They're Gartner Magic Quadrant again for 2020 and 2019, and I think as RightScale before that. The Optima product is a product used by many Fortune 500s, but it's generally been out of reach price-wise for smaller companies. There's a commitment to the platform and some minimums that make it kind of pricey. However, through a partnership with Big Green IT, we can actually bring that Flexera service down to Azure customers of basically any size. And today we have David Bloom here with us to tell us more about the Flexera solution. So, David?
Thanks, Mike. So I just want to do if you could go to the next slide.
Yep,
Just like to do a quick overview, just a very few minutes on what the Flexera platform can do. The platform takes the data from ACM that Mike just showed and brings it into the platform and then does additional work on that to give these enhanced features. Some of the things that it can do is it's really good at doing a show back, charge back type display. If you have a need to return costs back to a department or another organization. They also have a automation engine that today has 115 policies in it that can be applied to a subscription or a resource in a variety of different ways. The automation can be enhanced or changed by you or with our help to meet needs that you don't haven't been anticipated, that might be slightly different than what's standard. And also, the Flexera solution is not just an Azure solution. It can bring in just about any other cloud platform into a single pane of glass and allow you to see your cloud spend in one place. So it can pull in the big three, the Azure, AWS, and Google, but just about any other of the going platforms, it will actually pull that data in as well and allow you to see it. And when we do that charge back or show back, we're showing all of them back to that department. Mike, if you could move to the next slide for me. So the platform for the cost visualization is called Optima. And the way it works is we take all those costs from these different cloud platforms and break them down into what we call billing centers. And the billing centers are configurable by you and reconfigurable. They're not set and become a hard set item that you can't change later. But most people are setting them up in a certain way. So it depends on your organization. You might be one that breaks them down into marketing, accounting, and operations. Some people break them down into production and development. It just depends on what works for your organization. And you can break them down to as many as you want. And then within each one, you can break them down into sub-billing centers. So within the marketing department, you might have a sub-billing center for web development and another one for projects. And under projects, each project could have their own. So we can break them down, and then that's how we do the show back and charge back. Once the information is in the billing center, we can then report on it. We do very similar types of reporting to what ACM does, but there are some things that we can do that make it a lot easier. We have a report where we can show change over time, that why did something spike or not spike. And because we have 24 months of data, we can do that comparison over a longer term. And in one place, you can look and see, oh, well, I had a large growth in one type of resource or one resource group, whatever way you want to look at it. We can also take this data and with a very Excel-like interface, even apply functions, summing items, showing different items, adding and deleting columns, and then if need be, export that into a variety of formats so that can be used offline. We also can create multiple dashboards and share those dashboards either across teams or within specific users that they can only see their data. And those dashboards can be customized to what they want to see so that they don't have to really understand the platform. They can just log in and see what needs to be dealt with.
All right.
Mike, if you move to the next one.
Go ahead, there we go.
So the policies or the control part of this solution is called governance. It's not just governance, it's actually broken down into 5 subcategories, governance being one of them. And primarily cost management, the governance and the operational aspects are what we're using. And what Flexera has done is they have created these policies for us, and we can go in, just click a button and click apply, and then we can make some decisions based on that policy. We can say how frequently we want the policy to run. We can say what resources, what resource group, what subscription we want it to run against. We'll set thresholds. Mike mentioned underutilized resources. We might say, well, If something hasn't been run for 15 days, that's where we want to alert on it. And we could change those and set those in any way we want. In fact, if you didn't like exactly how it worked, you could even change even the code behind the scenes, and they provide that to you. Mike, if you go to the next screen. Once these policies run, they give you an alert. They will send you an email, and they can interface if you have an IT management system and push it out there so people don't have to come into this system. What I've shown here of the 115 policies that exist, these are the 12 that most customers are implementing out of the gate. Generally, what we'll do is when somebody signs up for the platform, we'll implement these policies as a alert only, because many of these policies can also make changes to the solution. Just like Mike said, you might have a unattached volume, a disk that you're paying for that isn't being used. The solution could go in and delete that disk. We generally want to look for that before we set the delete flag up, but it could make those changes. So usually we'll set these up, we'll come back a few months later, talk about what the data is, and possibly set up some additional ones or make some changes. And these policies, in addition to things that AACM can do, like the alerts, can do things like billing anomalies. We look back at the 24 months, we see that there's a certain threshold of spending that within a certain specific virtual machine. We see a spike, we can report on that. We can do things around governance where we say, like Mike said, I believe that the dev department might be able to open any type of resource they want. And we may want to allow that, not block them by policy, but send an alert if somebody's using some odd resource that we weren't expecting. The whole point of this platform is so you don't get that end of the month shock with a very big bill. We can take things, just about anything that has a interface within Azure we can act on. Mike was talking about tags. We can alert you when something isn't tagged when it should be. We can even make a change and add tags. So it's very dynamic what these policies can do. Mike, I think that's pretty much what I had to say about this.
Awesome. Yeah. What we find is the customers that make the jump to Flexera are usually the ones that have started using Azure Cost Management, and they've figured out what's available to them and what they can do, but then maybe they find out that they don't actually have the resources within their own company to stay on top of building the reports, and maybe they have a good idea of what kind of reporting they want to get, but maybe they don't have, I mean, back in the day, you know, any big customer would have a couple of crystal reports folks or people they're good at analyzing data and whatnot. But we find a lot of customers that don't have that type of resource within the company. On the Flexera side, you can get additional help from folks like us to help you set it up. But it is the reporting and automation tool that can actually act on all that data coming out of ACM. So it's a great fit for people that don't have another way to do that. And it gives you a lot of additional functionality beyond just looking at the data that comes out of ACM. All right, well, I mean, that's essentially the whole thing. Wade, have you got some?
Actually, I've got a question here. I know this one isn't even on a participant, and I'm sorry if I'm going to throw one out at David. By the way, David, thank you for sharing all that information with us. One of the things you said was interfacing with an IT system. Are you referring to, can we integrate this with things like ServiceNow?
That's correct. Yes, any of the ITSM systems. And what's nice about that is it's just, you don't have to go to another tool to look for those incidents. And we don't have to rely on email. We can actually get that richer notification directly into the ITSM.
That's great. Yeah, that because there's a lot of logic that people are building into tools like that, and they want to be able to get the information into and have different types of action taken. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you. I think I'm looking at the time. For the sake of time, we're going to continue to just kind of wrap this up. But right at the end, there's some questions potentially we can have as well. Kind of next steps, at least with Big Green IT, always we have like a 30-minute free live discussion, consultation, whatever you want to call it, with our subject matter experts like Mike and Wade. We also, you can complete a free, it's IT Azure migration assessment. We do a lot of pre-work for looking at potential costs, potential things, and so forth to give you that first shot at, hey, is this even within our reach of something we'd like to move forward on? There's some links here that you can get to us and schedule those things on our website, or contacting a couple of email addresses I have here. Go ahead, Mike. Next one.
Basically it.
No, well, there's some additional resources. I got a couple more slides. You'll know when it says thank you. That's the end. The light slide before that with the upcoming. Oops. The slide before that has one more before that. There you go. So additional resources, because they're all links, you'll get this email or this presentation, and there's a lot of good pieces in this. Today wasn't one of the times to talk about security and the trust center, but that's when we talk about, you know, HIPAA compliance and all these things that people really wonder about. Where can I get this information to be able to really move forward with management and others on Azure? So all of those links are there. Now we'll go to the next one. And we have one more in this particular series upcoming. It's 2 weeks from today, and that is on security and compliance. So that is just what we talk about. We tried to go through Azure 101 to start, just getting everybody on the same page, moving there to what it looks like for Azure data center migration, from there to what we went through today on cost management, and then we'll conclude this particular series with security. I was really in tune about doing this one today on cost management, because it's a combination of how do we truly, what it says, manage the cost from all the different angles, all the different departments and so forth. But then I also am real big on the optimize piece of it. We might go in when we do an Azure assessment or readiness assessment to say, you know, your usage might equate based on your VMs you have today on premise or rented somewhere else. It might be $16,000. And we go through the migration planning, it ends up being close to that. But then when we go through the optimization, which is different, go through the optimization of reserved instances, of SQL as a service, of web services, all that, and we might reduce that thing from 16 to 13. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. I'm glad these tools are here for everybody to have access to and to use, because it'll give you more of a confidence and comfort on not letting things either get away from you or planning correctly. So that was the primary for today's. And then, like I said, next in 2 weeks, we'll do security and compliance. A couple of on the right-hand side, just some other things to get a hold of us and the people that are here. We do have, even though today wasn't anything about Office 365, but we've extended our COVID relief plan. And if you either are our cost relief, and that is if you either have Office 365 on a Microsoft credit card or through another provider, moving that to us will actually provide you with 1 month free of cost. I think that's pretty much on that part for us. I just want to make sure there are any other final questions. We have a couple of minutes for that. I'm looking right now. I think we covered most of them, it looks like. So Mike or Wade, do you have any closing thoughts, comments?
I mean, not if people don't have any other questions.
Yeah.
Oh, Wade.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add too, we showed the cost management tool. Azure, and we'll hit a little bit on this in the next webinar, has a product called Azure Advisor, which coordinates and works with Azure Cost Management to help with your cost optimization. And Azure Advisor also gives you some security recommendations and high performance recommendations. So we'll hit on that in 2 weeks here, but it's a nice integration between these two pieces. And then, as Mike said, for that next level, cost management optimization, Flexera is a fantastic tool for that. So just want to give that extra little plug there.
All right, well, I'd like to thank Mike and Wade and David especially for coming on today, and everyone for participating. If you do have any questions further, by all means, reach out to us, and you will get this email of the presentation sometime in the next 24 to 40 hours. So thank you all, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.